I'm going to begin by showing a quote from Stephen Herrero's book on bear attacks. First of all, he says that to give a charging bear a reasonable chance to stop, and to give yourself reasonable safety, a person who is an expert with firearms should wait until the charging bear is within 50 to 100 feet away. Regardless of your experience with firearms, to wait for an angry charging grizzly to get within 50 to 100 feet before you shoot it is extremely stupid. If you know the bear intends to hurt you, you should put as many rounds as you can into it before it reaches you. Any advice to the contrary is reckless and may result in an entirely preventable death or injury. Most bear attacks are at short range, and generally speaking, when you have a bear that starts charging at you from a longer distance, this is somewhat abnormal, and may be a sign that the bear is more aggressive than other bears. This is not some great revelation, it is simply noticing differences in behavior. Herrero goes on to talk about how with a charging bear at close range, you want to not only kill the bear, but also stop it before it reaches you. He suggests with a close range bear that the first shot should be into the shoulder to cripple the bear, and the second shot should be anywhere in the vitals to kill the bear. I really don't understand the appeal of shooting just one shoulder and then the vitals. A bear can run to you and kill you even with a single injured shoulder. While a shot through the vitals may be lethal, it almost certainly won't kill the bear before it reaches you. If you have time for 2 shots, you should place one on each shoulder of the bear. If both the shoulders are broken, that bear is going to have one hell of a time trying to get to you. This will give you time to shoot into the vitals, or if you can, make a brain or spine shot. The conventional wisdom still seems to be that you should try to stop a charging bear with a brain shot. Both Stephen Herrero and I disagree with that. The brain is a very small target that is moving up and down as the bear charges at high speed. It's just not very likely that you are going to make that shot. People will try to make the argument that since handguns are not good for bear defense, you will need to make a headshot for it to be effective. Both of these things are wrong. Handguns with the right ammunition are definitely effective on bears, and the majority of handgun calibers have the ability to break a bear's bones. Bears have regular marrow-filled bones just like you and I. They simply have larger and thicker bones, which just means that they're more comparable to cattle than humans. People also like to talk about bear anatomy and how they think it's hard to penetrate through the skull of a bear. This is also largely wrong. Many calibers can penetrate into the brain of a bear with relative ease, though the slope of their head makes it somewhat more likely, not very likely, for a bullet to deflect off. If you have time for only one shot at a charging bear, try to hit the heart, and chances are that the bear will die before it can seriously injure you. You might get mauled some, but that is far better than a missed brain shot that went over the bear's back, or a shoulder shot that only wounds the bear, not killing it. An example of this is an incident of a father and a son who went elk hunting. A bear charged them. The father shot the bear through the heart with an arrow. The bear mauled the son for a bit, walked off, and then died. The son was injured, but not terribly so, and most of the blood that was on him was the bear's. Remember when I say that if you have time for only one shot, this does not mean you have the time to take a well-aimed shot. It means that you have maybe a second to shoot before the bear reaches you. I'm also going to say that you should have a general plan in mind of what to do if a bear attacks. You don't want to wait until the attack happens to decide whether to grab the bear spray or the handgun first. In the specific case that you are carrying bear spray and a handgun, you want to definitely grab the handgun first, because both specific attacks and statistics have shown that firearms are definitely more effective than bear spray. As is standard practice with law enforcement when dealing with bears, if you decide to use a non-lethal deterrent like bear spray, you want to have a firearm pointed at the bear as well in case the bear becomes enraged and attacks. If you are using a shotgun loaded with rubber slugs, for example, you want to have someone else close by with a shotgun loaded with buckshot, for example. You have to think about what happens if the bear does reach you and starts mauling you. What the best course for action greatly depends on your situation. In general, you want to keep your head and neck protected for obvious reasons. It is inevitable that the bear is going to bite you, It is likely, though, that you'll have some choice in what it bites. For example, you let the bear bite your non-dominant arm instead of your neck, while your dominant hand is used to pull a handgun and shoot the bear at point-blank range. It may also be the case that if you have a bear spray can in your non-dominant hand, you can hold that out for the bear to bite first. There has been at least one documented case where a bear has bitten a bear spray can and then stopped attacking. Ideally, you'd like to protect your legs as well, but that may not be practical. The reason for this is that attacks typically happen in remote areas where cell reception is poor, and you may have to walk for miles to get reception to make a call for help. That would be very difficult if you have a torn Achilles tendon, for example. When we start talking about shooting a bear while the bear is on top of you, we have to acknowledge two things. First, that really long revolvers are unwieldy to use in a position like this because you basically have to hold it at arm's length out to the side to get the muzzle pointed at the bear. Second, that a semi-automatic handgun with a shorter barrel is better in this situation because it holds more and reloads faster. Dick Fairburn mentioned in one of his videos a story of a young guy who was attacked by a bear and who had to reload his .44 Magnum during this attack. The obvious downside of its semi-auto is that they almost certainly won't cycle when the barrel/slide is shoved right up against the bear. First of all, you need to mount something like a flashlight onto this handgun so that the flashlight will contact the bear first, and the handgun can cycle normally. Also, there is no benefit to shoving a pistol right up against the bear, only downsides. One last thing about flashlights. I know of at least one dangerous game guide in Africa and 2 guides in Alaska that have lights mounted on their weapons. This is because you can have encounters at night as well. When I say something like you should shoot the bear as it is mauling you, people will rightfully point out that this is technically fighting back, and that you are not supposed to fight back against the surprise bear that is making a defensive attack. It is also true that shooting the bear will likely make that bear angrier and bite harder in the short term, but it will also likely make the bear dead relatively soon, just as long as you hit something vital. If you shoot and kill the bear instead of passively taking a mauling, you put your life in your hands instead of leaving it up to the bear or up to chance to decide whether you live or die. And as you can see on this chart, playing dead or passively resisting is hardly a guarantee that the bear will maul you less violently. Roughly a third of the time, playing dead results in either no change in the bear's behavior or an increase in the intensity of the attack. Likewise, we have statistics that bear spray only stops brown bear charges only 33% of the time. Park rangers, for example, will almost never talk about these facts because they have to cater their message to the people who know the least about bear behavior. Such nuanced information is easily confused or forgotten by the tourists who just learned about bear safety yesterday. It's quite obvious that not every situation will require you to fight back. When you put yourself in bear country with no weapon to defend yourself with, and you happen to surprise a grizzly, you've given yourself only one real method for survival, that is to protect your head and neck while you go limp and play dead. An example of this would be the bear that attacked Andrew and Barbara. Andrew resisted for a few seconds before he relaxed and played dead. The bear attacked Andrew for roughly 15 to 20 seconds. Barbara, on the other hand, wasn't so fortunate. She resisted and was killed only after a few seconds. There are some cases where you have bears intentionally walking into camp and trying to chew on people. Cases where fighting back with deadly force is your best option. Strangely, Herrero suggests that fleeing might also be an option. I don't know why he would say this, because running from what may be a predatory grizzly is an extraordinarily bad idea. Fighting back is a good idea, but you have to understand that it may have no fear of you whatsoever, and you also have to expect that you may need to use lethal force. The obvious answer is to shoot and kill the bear, and it's quite strange that Stephen Herrero did not mention this as the ideal solution. Herrero also mentions how he believes that tests have proven, quote, high-powered rifles are the most effective firearm for killing bears. The statement would have actual weight and substance behind it if the tests he was talking about involved shooting bears or other living creatures. However, these tests involve shooting into a sawdust and silt mixture instead of anything remotely resembling a living creature. The way I like to measure effectiveness is to measure the time it takes for a living creature to die when shot. How a bullet performs when shot into sawdust means nothing to me. If we were measuring specifically penetration and expansion, you could use something like ballistics gel or water jugs, both of which more closely resemble largely water-based creatures like bears and humans than a box of sawdust. Herrero also talks about the use of shotguns for bear defense. He talks about buckshot, but either he doesn't understand the basic terminology of buckshot, or the editor really butchered this part. He's trying to talk about double-aught buckshot. These pellets are .33 caliber, and they would be SG, not SSG, in European nations. He mentions that some, quote, experts doubt whether large buckshot can kill grizzlies, and that he does not know of any failures of buckshot. I can confidently say, even though I do know of 2 failures, large buckshot, like double-aught, is definitely a good choice for bear defense. While buckshot is relatively limited in range, that probably doesn't matter that much for the average person hiking in bear country, for example. The vast majority of bear attacks happen at pretty close range. The only circumstances that I can think of where there would be a significant likelihood of a bear charging at you from a greater distance is with a particularly aggressive bear, or perhaps a situation where you may be guiding or accompanying a bear hunt, and the hunt goes wrong and the bear charges you. In this situation, having a .308 semi-automatic rifle loaded with Barnes TSX or any other good bullets would be ideal in my opinion. Continuing with buckshot, I specifically talk about its use for bear defense in another video. There has only been one documented case that I can find where buckshot failed, and this has resulted in someone's death. When buckshot does fail, it appears that this is due to the soft lead pellets flattening when they hit hard bone, and this can be prevented by using hard cast lead buckshot. I also wanted to compare what sort of an advantage a 3.5 inch 12 gauge shell would have over a regular buckshot 2 3/4 inch round. Obviously, a 3.5 inch shell has twice the number of double-aught pellets as the 2 3/4 inch shell does. My thought process being that it might be a good idea to have a 3.5 inch shell in the chamber and regular shells in the magazine. This would give you a large amount of pellets in the first round and still give you good magazine capacity. Scott from Kentucky Ballistics actually tested a federal 3.5 inch shell from an 18.5 inch barrel. It had 18 copper-plated double-aught pellets and an advertised velocity of 1,100 feet per second. The pellets were shot through 2 layers of drywall and penetrated maybe an inch or 2 short of the 16-inch block. In comparison, a 3.5 inch 10 gauge double-aught shell of the same design has both the same amount of pellets and the same advertised velocity. I should also mention that drywall has very little bullet resistance. Anyway, it seems that a 3.5 inch shell gives you an increased payload at the cost of penetration. I say this because it's fairly common for regular double-aught 2 3/4 inch shells to give you 18 to 20 inches of penetration in ballistics gel. In conclusion, a 3.5 inch chamber is nice, but far from a necessity, especially if you plan on using it for something like bear defense, where penetration is really important. It may be more of an advantage if you load your own shells and you can get more velocity, and consequently more penetration. 3.5 inch double-aught buck shells would actually work for home defense, even though using them that way would be ridiculous overkill. Contrary to popular belief, they generally don't overpenetrate because of their fairly low velocity. Their velocity is actually very similar to some low recoil 2 3/4 inch double-aught buck loads. As a side note, Herrero makes some really strange statements about how some people that have high-powered rifles would be tempted to shoot non-charging bears at long distance. This should go without saying, but simply holding a high-powered rifle does not make someone want to shoot a bear that is not aggressive or charging from a long distance. Herrero also says that you shouldn't put a round in the chamber of a weapon unless in imminent danger. A round in the chamber is typically dangerous only when the user is reckless or totally inexperienced with firearms. Both of these problems is the person holding the firearm, not the weapon itself. There are some weapons that are not drop safe, meaning they may discharge if you drop them at the right angle onto a hard surface. Practically speaking, though, this hardly ever happens in real-world use. And it's really not that hard to find out what weapons are not drop safe to avoid them. What is much more dangerous is when the bear damages your arm or hand and you cannot chamber a round because that requires two hands. Having a round in the chamber can be the difference between life and death in a bear attack.